devastating news is confirmed at daybreak. All 229 people on board Swissair Flight 111 have perished.
They basically told me, you know, there were no survivors, and I really don't remember much after that. It felt like my whole soul was being sucked out of my body.
The Canadian Transportation Safety Board launched an investigation. The deputy chief is Larry Vance. He has 31 years' experience as a pilot and 14 as an air crash investigator. His starting point is the tape from air traffic control.
We had quite a bit of information, in fact, from the very beginning, because we knew that the aircraft had caught on fire, if you will, and that the pilots were fighting that circumstance. What we were interested in was how the fire started, how the fire spread, and how it eventually disabled the airplane. That's the key for us, was to answer those three questions.
Now, by going deep into this investigation, we can reveal what caused a modern passenger airliner to plummet into the Atlantic Ocean, killing everyone on board. Before investigators can establish what caused the fire on Swissair 111, they must recover the wreckage. Over 20 agencies from Canada, the US, and Europe are drafted in to help. Personal effects and wreckage wash ashore along 200 kilometers of rugged coastline.
You will find human remains. Can't tell you how to deal with it, just deal with it and get on with the job.
Only one body is found intact. Divers and remotely operated vehicles scour the wreckage 54 meters under the sea.
It was very critical for us to try and recover the black boxes, because that's where you get a lot of the basic information about what was happening in the cockpit. So we were very anxious to get our hands on those.
Within 9 days of the crash, both black boxes are found intact.
Did we see the emergency tap least of air conditioning smoke?
The team learn that the pilots first smelled and then saw smoke.
Stefan, der Rauch ist weg.
But after the smoke cleared, it returned, bringing fire with it.
Swissair 111, check you're cleared to start fuel dump.
But investigators learn little more.
The information for the last 6 minutes on both recorders was missing, so that was a bit of a disappointment to us. We thought we were going to have the information all the way to the impact, but in fact we didn't.
The black boxes don't provide any quick answers. But Vance is confident the plane's wreckage holds more clues. It takes months to retrieve the wreckage and personal effects. Bereaved relatives are invited to come and reclaim their loved ones' possessions.
The carnage was unspeakable. I mean, there were suitcases that looked like a demon could have shredded them. And yet there were certain things that were just in perfect condition that they just, you know, picked up out of the water.
Lynn sees her husband's notepad with the shopping list he wrote that morning.
The fact that, you know, his notepad was there that I could read, magazines were intact, but none of the passengers except one. And when I asked them, you know, why? How could this be? Basically, they just explained it as the G-force and, you know, what happens, and then I wish I never asked.
Eventually, 98% of the plane is recovered. But it's in over 2 million pieces. The difficult task of finding clues is made easier as the plane crashed not on land, but in water.
It presented us with a very unique opportunity because not very many times are you going to have an event where you have a full-fledged fire in progress, extinguished all at the same time, all instantly, so it preserves that fire in that moment of time.
Investigators' priority is to establish where the fire began and what initiated it. Don Enns is the Transportation Safety Board's senior technical investigator. He heads the investigation's fire group.
The first bits that came up that were identified as fire damage were from the either the cockpit or the first-class galley or the first-class compartment. So we're looking at that area.
Seeing that all the fire-damaged wreckage is from the front of the plane, the team decides the best way to understand what happened is to reconstruct it. Like a 5,000-piece puzzle, the wreckage is painstakingly attached to a full-size wire jig.
As you put more of the stuff together, the picture became more and more clear. I can remember looking at the roof of Galley 1 in particular and seeing all the heat damage from the outside in, which is actually putting the heat source above the galley.
The reconstruction shows that the fire was raging not in the galley, but out of sight, above it. In the attic space, which runs the full length of the plane. It houses electronic equipment, wiring, air conditioning components, and insulation. There were no smoke detectors in the attic, and no requirement to have them.
Passengers would have absolutely no idea what was going on until the fire actually came through the ceiling, and even that would only have happened in the first-class galley, maybe in the first-class section. At the back of the airplane, business class and economy class, they would have absolutely no idea that anything was amiss.
A bulkhead wall divides the attic into 2 compartments, with a small tunnel for wiring to pass through. By understanding who could smell the smoke when, from the black box recordings, and by looking at the fire damage on the reconstruction, the team established that the fire started in front of the bulkhead, above the cockpit ceiling, where the pilots noticed the smell almost immediately.
If it had started behind that bulkhead wall, it would have done a lot more damage, more rearward into the fuselage, and the people in the back of the airplane would have smelt smoke and odor before the people in the cockpit did.
Now they know where the fire started. They need to work out how it started.
One of the things that we looked for, of course, was whether or not there was any criminal activity involved.
Close inspection of some of the wreckage suggests there was.
Very early on in the investigation, we started finding in what looked like buckshot from a shotgun shell. The little ball bearing things, they were everywhere. In the seats and the seat backs and so on, we're thinking, well, somebody's in the airplane shooting it up, you know, like, what's going on here?
They question whether the fire was part of a terrorist plot, where someone boarded the plane with a shotgun. Until they learn what was in the plane's cargo hold.
It turns out that they were the little tips for ballpoint pens. Those little tiny roller things that they put in the end of a ballpoint pen. There were tens of thousands of those things.
The plane hit the sea with such force, it shot the ball bearings through the cargo hold into the cabin and cockpit. With criminality ruled out, Vance and his team must consider other possible causes of Swissair 111's fire.
We know where the fire started. We knew it was up above the ceiling in the cockpit area. And then you start looking for potential ignition sources up there. And right away, the obvious one that comes to mind is wiring.
The plane housed 250 kilometers of wiring. 3,000 pieces have been collected from the crash site. Air crash investigator Jim Foote knows his team's task is enormous. First, they must try to identify where each wire came from.
The B wires were from basically in the cockpit back to the first door. So those wires we were definitely interested in. Any wire that began with the letter B, we wanted.
Now we're going to be examining every inch of this wiring.
Jim's team search for damaged or missing insulation to see if they can find the wire that ignited the fire.
Any wire, if you get the wire rubbing against a metal piece, then you can wear through that insulation. And if that wire is powered, then you could have an arcing event as it touches that structure.
An arcing event is an electrical discharge which leads from an exposed live wire. Like a tiny bolt of lightning, it creates a split-second flash of light and intense heat. This arc melts the wire's copper threads, leaving a telltale copper ball. It's these copper balls the team search for. They find 20 wire segments that had arced. Most of them ran through the ceiling of the cockpit. Any of them could have sparked the fire. 8 of the wire segments powered the state-of-the-art personal in-flight entertainment system, which was fitted to the first and business class cabins in the year before the disaster. But despite extensive testing, investigators can't pinpoint which arcing event ignited the inferno.
Quite disappointed with all the effort that we had put in, all the material that we had recovered, that we hadn't isolated ourselves down to the lead event arc.
Analysis of the wiring comes to an end. Jim Foote is resigned to not finding the initiating arc. But as he packs up, he takes one last look at one of the arced wires from the in-flight entertainment system.
He wasn't treating them quite as carefully as he had in the past, so he was opening up the ends that were all crumpled up.
I started to unravel these wires. Lo and behold, I found a second arc mark on the same phase as one of the other ones that we already noted.
Larry? Have a look.
I knew these wires well enough, and Jim knew them well enough, that when I looked through that microscope and I saw that tiny little arc, I thought, wow, that's it. We found it. Jim found it.
To confirm that this is the arc that sparked the fire, they place it into a mock-up of the cockpit ceiling's wiring system.
There's a lot of wires that come through the ceiling at that area, and they're attached to a metal bracket. What we think happened is that this wire chafed on this bracket.
Planes are subjected to constant vibration as they travel at over 900 kilometers an hour. Investigators believe vibration caused the chafing. The wire's insulation became damaged, allowing the wire to arc on the metal bracket.
We finally come to a conclusion in our own minds, almost instantly, to say that had to be it, because we knew from the positioning of those wires that where he had found that little arc was exactly where the fire had started.
The team were concerned the